Chapter 97, 6th Year, October.
His name was always funny, and he'd shrug and ask to stay. She'd sigh like Twig the Wonder Kid, and turn her face away. She's uncertain if she likes him, but she knows she really loves him. It's a crash course for the ravers. It's a driving Saturday.
Saturday, 9th October, 1976. Ugh, Remus groaned, climbing unsteadily to his feet as his body finished fitting itself back together. That didn't seem too bad. James transformed back into a human, smiling encouragingly as Remus winced. Depends on what you mean by bad, their friend muttered, yanking on his trousers. James politely averted his eyes, and Sirius, still a dog, plucked Remus's shirt from the floor and trotted over with it in his mouth. Cheers, Padfoot. Remus smiled down at him, and Sirius wagged his tail, panting. He flopped over onto the floor, hoping to coax Remus into a belly rub, but the tall boy just shook his head and rolled his eyes, grinning. Thank Merlin it's Saturday, James said through a yawn, settling down on the beaten-up couch. A new addition, transfigured from one of James's shoes. It had taken quite a few tries to get right, and once they did, the marauders quickly discovered why there was so little furniture in the shack. The poor sofa already had deep claw marks and stuffing hanging out from one side. Yeah, if Madame Pomfrey lets me off the hospital wing, I'll go straight to bed anyway, Remus agreed, stifling a yawn of his own and reclining on his cot. You're lucky, Peter said, shifting abruptly from rat to human in one of the corners. Supposed to be taking Desi to Hogsmeade at 11. Prongs, don't you have to lead the third years down? Nah, James yawned, groaning loudly. Now Evans knows about Remus's furry little problem, she's actually cutting me some slack. That fifth-year kid with the sunburn is doing it instead. Evans doesn't know anything else, does she? Sirius asked, turning back into a human to speak. He threw himself down on the sofa next to James. Lily finding out about Remus's lycanthropy was a new development. Apparently it had happened at the end of the previous term. Sirius wasn't entirely sure how he felt about it. It was a marauder's thing, knowing the secret. But he certainly wasn't going to kick up a fuss, seeing as she'd found out from Snape, who'd found out from Sirius. James shook his head in response, settling back onto the sagging pillows and shutting his eyes. Oi! Sirius poked his shoulder. We've got to go soon, don't sleep. You lot go, Remus said quietly, watching them. Get some rest. Thanks for coming and all that. Coming to Hogsmeade, Moony? Sirius said hopefully, dragging James off the couch. 3 broomsticks? Can't, Remus murmured. Didn't I tell you? Had my permission revoked after the attacks. What? Sirius felt a flash of heated anger. They can't punish you for something some other bastard's done. It was completely unfair. Dumbledore had already confirmed that Moony had nothing to do with the attacks. He would never hurt anyone. Shh! Remus hissed, frowning. It's not to punish me, it's for my safety. Now get lost, the lot of you. Sirius blinked, abashed. He hadn't even considered that Moony might be in danger. Did this mean that Dumbledore thought Remus could become a target? It was hard to imagine anything happening so close to Hogwarts. The war was meant to be something separate, something far away. Sirius had always thought that surely, as long as they had Dumbledore around, nothing truly awful could happen. But he supposed that line of thinking had always been a bit naive. He made his way back to Gryffindor Tower with James and Peter, shuffling under the invisibility cloak. By the time they finished climbing the seemingly endless stairs, all 3 boys were utterly knackered. They collapsed on their beds, breathless. Reckon we can get a few hours kip before Hogsmeade, yeah? James mumbled, burying his face in his pillow. Sirius nodded in agreement. Peter was already asleep. When he woke next, it was to the sound of Peter fumbling frantically in his trunk, muttering to himself. Bollocks, where is it? I could have sworn I stuck it in here. Keep it down, Pete, Sirius groaned, rolling over. Aren't you lot getting up for Hogsmeade? Sirius groaned again, mumbling, "No," into his pillow. Peter continued to dig noisily in his trunk. From behind the drawn curtains of his bed, James snored loudly. Seemed as if he'd be skipping the Hogsmeade excursion too, and if Remus wasn't going, then Sirius figured there really was no point in getting up anyway. It wasn't as if Pete would want company. He'd be with Desdemona the whole time. Peter must have found whatever he was looking for, because the lid of his trunk slammed shut. James snorted from his bed, and Sirius thought for a moment he'd wake up, but then the snoring resumed. "Oi, Pete, hang on." Sirius sat up, rustling around in the pocket of his cloak. Peter paused by the door, looking a bit irritated. "What? I don't want to be late." "Oh, calm your tits, I'm sure Desi'll wait. Come here, take this." He shoved a few galleons into Peter's hands. "For the Halloween fire whiskey. Just slip it to Rosemerta, she'll know what we want." Peter huffed, but pocketed the money, hurrying out of the door with a quick farewell. Sirius fell back onto his bed, curling up under the blanket. It was so warm. Bloody hell! Sirius was pulled once more from sleep's grasp, this time by the loud slam of the door and James's accompanying exclamation. "Oh, sorry," Remus apologized. "I thought you'd been Hogsmeade." "We were going to," Sirius yawned and stretched, rolling over. "But our beds looked so comfortable." "Damn, I didn't mean to sleep that long." James rolled his shoulders, standing. "I was going to slip Rosemerta a bit of cash for the Halloween fire whiskey too." "Don't worry, I got Peter to do it." Sirius folded his hands behind his head, resisting the urge to close his eyes and drift off again. "Is it lunchtime?" "Yeah," Remus smiled, looking quite pleased to have company. "Shall we go down?" "Let me shower first," James said, slouching over to the bathroom. "Ugh, and I really ought to start that Defense Against the Dark Arts essay on Patronuses. Have either of you done it?" Sirius didn't bother responding. He knew the question hadn't really been for him. "Drafted," Remus said absent-mindedly, beginning to flip through his own stack of homework. "You can take a look if you want, but I bet you know it better than me anyway." "Hardly had time for the reading," James shouted from inside the bathroom, shirt off and toothbrush in his mouth. He never shut the door, desensitized from years in the Quidditch locker room. With the game coming up and these prefect patrols, not that I'm complaining about those. Patronuses look really cool though. I wanted to be the first one to do it. Sirius rolled his eyes fondly, smiling. Normally he tried to give James a run for his money in Defense Against the Dark Arts, but when it came to Patronuses there was no denying that Potter was the best suited for the task. The power of the spell was tied directly to emotions, more specifically, positive emotions. When it came to sheer, stubborn optimism, James had everyone beat, and Sirius didn't think he'd be surprised if Potter managed the spell on his very first try. Of course, Sirius was sure that he'd pick it up easily too, but he couldn't conjure happy memories in a split second the way James could. "So we've sorted the booze," he said, speaking up so that James could hear him over the running shower. "Food is easy, and it'll be right after the feast anyway, so no one will be hungry except Moony." "Up yours," Remus said calmly, as he reclined onto his own bed, leaning against the headboard. "Decorations," Sirius grinned. "Well, I've asked Avni and Hufflepuff to do something creative with pumpkins, so we'll see how that goes. Then all we need is music. You'll do that again, won't you, Moony?" Remus shrugged. "I could, but last time everyone just put on whatever they wanted anyway." He still seemed distracted, frowning down at the notes he'd taken on Patronuses. "That's fine," Sirius reassured him. "Just get them going for the first few tracks. Something they can dance to this time?" Now Remus looked up, smirking sarcastically. "You can dance to Pink Floyd, if you try hard enough." Sirius's throat felt dry. He swallowed. "I know you have standards, but, Mary asked if you could stick on some ABBA, maybe?" He would die before he admitted to Remus the absolutely sickening amount of times that he had spent listening to SOS that summer. "Oh, Jesus!" Remus threw himself dramatically back onto the mattress, flinging an arm over his face. "Spare me." Sirius laughed, trying not to stare at the sliver of skin along his waistband where his jumper had tugged up. "Shit! Mary!" James shouted suddenly. Sirius frowned. "What?" he yelled back. James bolted out of the bathroom, towel wrapped hastily around his waist, soaking through and dripping all over the floorboards. "Mary!" he repeated earnestly. "You were supposed to treat her to a day out in Hogsmeade to make up for her birthday." "Oh, buggering fuck!" Sirius smacked himself in the forehead, groaning. "How do I keep forgetting?" "Not your fault, mate," James said soothingly, grabbing another towel and turning his hair into an absolute bird's nest as he dried it. "You've been busy." Sirius doubted that that excuse would mollify Mary. She knew better than anyone how little of his time was spent on homework, and now he didn't even have Quidditch as an excuse for why he was so preoccupied. It was just bad luck that Hogsmeade had fallen the day after a full moon. Sirius had been so anxious to make sure the night went well that it was practically all he'd been thinking about for the past week. Ah, well, she'll forgive me. He ran a hand through his hair, tugging at the tangled strands. "I'll take her out next time, and really go mad on Valentine's Day." "That's months away," Remus pointed out. Sirius shrugged. It wasn't as if there was a closer holiday he could take advantage of. They were doing the party for Halloween, and he'd be at the Potters for Christmas. James shoved his glasses onto his nose, still clad in nothing but a towel, as he rifled through his dresser for clothes. "Your funeral, mate." He shook his head. "You're going to lose that girl if you're not careful." Thursday, 21st October, 1976. It wasn't as if he was trying to be a bad boyfriend. Sirius did care about Mary, and he didn't enjoy making her angry, but there were just other things that he cared about more sometimes. Besides, he thought it was bloody ridiculous expecting someone to become the center of your universe just because you were dating. He wasn't like Pete. He didn't spend every waking minute thinking about his girlfriend. He hadn't thought he'd been expected to. But clearly, Mary had different ideas. She kept bringing up the fact that their anniversary was coming up, and making snide remarks along the lines of, "You'd think that after a year you'd start taking things more seriously." She did not appreciate his response. "But Mary, I'm always taking things seriously." This led to quite a few arguments in which Mary insisted that he didn't care about her, and Sirius insisted that he did, which led Mary to demand that he prove it, which led Sirius to demand that she explain why she was suddenly needing him to prove himself every 10 seconds. "Bloody hell, MacDonald, we're dating, aren't we? Why would I have asked you to be my girlfriend if I didn't care about you?" "I don't know, Black. That's what I'm trying to figure out." Sirius began to feel as if they were running in circles, rehashing the same fight over and over again as the weeks slipped by. But he wasn't sure how to fix it. He would always try to make it up to Mary, showering her with attention to apologize for offending her, but it was never sustainable. He would eventually find his interest tugged away, becoming preoccupied with his friends or research on the latest prank. Inevitably, he would forget to walk her to class, or snap at her when he was having a bad morning, or make a joke that had her bristling like a cat, and the cycle would start all over again. At least the make-up sex was bloody good fun. In fact, one Thursday near the end of the month, Sirius skeeved off arithmancy specifically to spend a bit of quality time making up for his latest slight. James and Remus were in class, Peter was off doing something with chess club, and Mary had a free, which meant it was the perfect opportunity to sneak up to the boys' dorm and cast a locking charm on the door. Sirius had a Bowie record on in the background, and his brain had just begun to go fuzzy with heat when he felt Mary's hands at his hips, tugging on his trousers. He froze. "What are you doing?" "Taking off your trousers, obviously." "Why?" Mary grinned wickedly. "Do you really need me to explain it to you, Black?" She leaned forward, lips brushing against the juncture of his collarbone and shoulder, hands sliding down his thighs. It felt amazing, but it was still light out, sunshine bright through the windows. And his legs. She'd see. "Stop!" Sirius yelped, pushing her away. He was breathing hard, heat tangled with cold panic in his gut. Mary stared at him, shocked. "What?" His heart pounded, fists inside his chest, tongue knotted with anxiety. Sirius thought of the sharp, ugly lines marring the back of his legs, the way she'd look at him if she saw them. Disgust and pity and horror. and she'd ask what happened, and he'd have to say something to explain, and I just don't want to do that. Now Mary looked hurt, confused, embarrassed. "And what exactly is it you think I was going to do?" she demanded, crossing her arms over her chest. Sirius backtracked. "Nothing, I should probably keep my trousers on, in case one of the lads comes back." Mary frowned. "You said they've got arithmancy for the next hour." "Yeah, but Pete doesn't. Wouldn't want him walking in on anything. I'm pretty sure he and Desi have only made it to second base." Mary studied him, leaning back on her heels. After a moment, she said slowly, "You know, Sirius, we don't have to do anything if you don't want." Something about the way she was looking at him, eyes piercing like arrows through his chest, made him dizzy. He sucked in a shallow breath. No, I want to just come here." He reached out, snagging her wrist, tugging her towards him. She hesitated, but eventually relented, falling back into his arms.